Today at 6, a fresh wave of rail strikes in the run-up to Christmas and in the new year as strike action intensifies. The RMT announces 4 separate 48-hour rail strikes, 2 of them just 10 days before Christmas. The mother of 2 young children killed in a house fire in Nottingham on Sunday has also died. A man is held on suspicion of murder.
And on BBC London, the soon-to-be father who was fatally stabbed at the Notting Hill Carnival. We speak to his family as police appeal for help to catch his killer.
Good evening. More than 40,000 rail workers are expected to walk out in December and January in a wave of 48-hour strikes that will hit train services across Britain. It's a significant escalation in the strike action that began in June. The RMT says strikes will take place on Tuesday the 13th and Wednesday the 14th, and then Friday the 16th and Saturday the 17th of December. There'll be 4 more days of strikes on the 3rd, 4th, 6th and 7th of January. There will also be an overtime ban over Christmas and New Year. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin has the latest.
Christmas is coming,
all the way around.
But so are more train strikes, and with them, weeks of disruption.
This latest round of strikes will show how important our members are to the running of the country, and will send a clear message that we want a good deal on job security, pay and conditions for our people. We have been reasonable, but it is impossible to find a negotiated settlement when the dead hand of the government is presiding over and blocking a resolution in these talks.
Last week, the RMT announced its members had voted in favour of further strike action, potentially lasting into next spring. Unions and rail employers have been in intensive talks after strikes that were planned for early this month were called off. But the RMT says it didn't get the new proposals it was hoping for during those talks. Today, the union urged passengers to be angry at the government, not rail workers. The government does have final sign-off on what's agreed, but says it's for the employers and unions to come to an agreement between them that's fair to workers, taxpayers and passengers. The rail industry argues COVID left the railway in a financial hole and reforms are needed to afford higher pay. Is it the case that the reason talks haven't been able to make more progress is because the government isn't allowing you to make the offer that you want?
We want to sit back down with RMT and work forward. As I say, there's details on both sides that still need to be resolved. That's an area we want to talk to RMT about. But putting strike action on will not resolve that situation. It's actually sitting at the table and making sure that we can try and get a final agreement on the reform package that then allows us to put forward a sensible offer to people.
For businesses which depend on people coming to visit, like those in Blackpool, today's news has dampened their hopes for the festive season.
Anything, again, that is going to knock us back at that time is going to have a huge detrimental impact financially. And as I say, we are still recovering from COVID.
The Transport Secretary is expected to meet the RMT's Mick Lynch later this week, but as things stand, more travel misery lies ahead. Katie Austin, BBC News.
The mother of 2 young children killed in a house fire in Nottingham on Sunday has also died. 28-year-old Fatoumata Hadjoura was taken to hospital after the fire in the family's flat in the suburb of Clifton, but died earlier today. Her 2 children, who were 1 and 3 years old, lost their lives on Sunday. A 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder, as our Midlands correspondent Phil Mackey reports.
A mother and 2 young daughters. 3 lives lost in what police have described as a horrendous crime. This was Fatima Drama, who was 3, her 1-year-old sister Naima, and their mother Fatoumata Hadjoura. The fire took hold in the early hours of Sunday morning in the family's upstairs flat. The children were taken to hospital but didn't survive. Their mother died this morning. Neighbours have found it hard to take in.
The kids always said hello, not me. To me, they didn't have a hurtful bone in the body, so I don't know who would want to do this to them, you know what I mean?
The children are beautiful and it's devastating. It's not good.
Abu Bakr, Fatoumata's husband and the father of both children, was out of the country at the time. He flew back yesterday and along with relatives is being looked after by specially trained police officers. Nottinghamshire police had already launched a murder investigation before the children's mother died today, and detectives have been granted an extra 36 hours to question the 31-year-old man who was arrested in connection with their deaths. There have been many tributes, including from the Gambian community in Nottinghamshire and the nursery which Fatima attended, which said she loved a cuddle and was happiest with a paintbrush in her hand. Phil Mackey, BBC News, Nottingham.
The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said the UK must end what he called its dependency on immigration. Speaking to business leaders at the conference of the Confederation of British Industry in Birmingham, Sir Keir said his priority was spending more on training workers who are already here. But, talking to our political editor Chris Mason, he refused to commit to lowering overall immigration.
Plenty of businesses, urban and rural, are crying out for more workers. Today, farmers gathered to talk about the problem.
There's a strong chance that we'll put our business out of business. It's very difficult to see a way forward when we have no clear idea how we're going to recruit next year, and when the cost, the inflation that's built into that workforce every year is going up in double digits.
And are the politicians listening?
It doesn't feel like it to me.
Enter Keir Starmer talking to business leaders and trying to lay on the charm.
Labour is ready, but a party that is proud of being pro-business, that respects the contribution profit makes to our jobs, growth and our tax base.
But Labour are determined to learn a lesson of Brexit, a concern about too much immigration.
Our common goal must be to help the British economy off its immigration dependency, to start investing more in training workers who are already here.
What a change. Yes, it's been in the offing for a while, but it's worth emphasising what this amounts to. From a party that oversaw a huge increase in immigration from Central and Eastern Europe less than 2 decades ago, and from a man who, when he campaigned for the Labour leadership 3 years ago, advocated maintaining freedom of movement with the European Union. So what does Keir Starmer say to those businesses desperate to bring in more workers from abroad? You're effectively saying no, or not as much as they would like.
Well, what I'm saying is we've got to look at the short term, but we can't always just have a sticking plaster.
Is immigration right now too high?
If what's driving it is a skills failure, then we need to address that. And that means, Chris, that in areas where we're over-reliant on immigration because we haven't fixed the skills problem, I'd like to see that immigration come down.
I'm not sure that was an answer, though. Is it too high?
Well, Chris, I'm not going to pluck an arbitrary number and say that's the right number.
But do you want it to come down?
If one of the drivers of immigration is that we've got hundreds of thousands of people who were in the workforce just 2 or 3 years ago and now aren't, because they can't get access to health treatment or mental health treatment. I want to fix that problem.
Plenty here don't buy Keir Starmer's argument about immigration, but they are giving Labour a fresh look. Chris Mason, BBC News in Birmingham.
More than 150 people are still missing after an earthquake in Indonesia. The death toll in West Java has risen to 268. Many of the dead were children killed as schools collapsed. The government says thousands of homes have been destroyed and roads have been damaged, which is making it hard to reach the worst hit areas. The epicentre of the earthquake was in Cianjur on the island of Java, from where our Indonesia correspondent Valja Baraputri has sent this report.
Rescue workers remind people not to get too close to a ruin of a house. They are trying to evacuate a body of a 28-year-old man trapped in concrete after a 3-floor house collapsed to the ground. There were 5 people at the time, but the others survived.
The other people were on the highest floor. They managed to be rescued. My brother-in-law was on the first floor. The ruins fell on him.
The government estimated that most victims are children because of the number of boarding schools in the area that have been destroyed. Meanwhile, many destroyed houses are left by the owners who took refuge in makeshift tents.
The closer to the epicenter of the earthquake, the more visible the damage, some beyond repair. People are too afraid to go back to their houses. Well, as you can see, the slanted floors are very prone to collapsing, even with the smallest aftershock.
151 people are still missing, many trapped under a landslide triggered by the earthquake.
As for the victims who are still buried in the rubble, I have ordered that the search for victims and their evacuation must be prioritised.
The Indonesian Geophysical Agency has learned that the earthquake is once in 20-year event. For hundreds of injured people at the hospital, the effect could last a lifetime. Valdia Baraputri, BBC News, Cianjur.
Manchester United have announced that Cristiano Ronaldo is to leave the club with immediate effect. It follows a recent interview by the striker in which he said he felt betrayed by the club, didn't respect the manager, Erik ten Hag, and that he was being forced out. Tonight, the club thanked the 37-year-old for his contribution and wished him well for the future. At the World Cup in Qatar, a shock win for Saudi Arabia over Argentina today. Argentina came into this tournament as one of the favourites, but the Saudi side have just ended their 36 unbeaten run of matches. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss was watching.
They've turned the World Cup upside down. A day of Saudi celebration after one of the biggest shocks the tournament has ever seen. The rank outsiders were up against one of the favourites, Argentina, and the mighty Lionel Messi. Argentina's first defeat for 3 years, and for Saudi Arabia, a day and a victory to go down in footballing folklore. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Well, when Jack Grealish scored England's 6th goal yesterday, he didn't do a somersault like the Saudi player. Instead, he did this. And this is why. Last week, 12-year-old Manchester City fan Finlay met Jack Grealish after writing to him. Finlay has cerebral palsy, as does Jack Grealish's sister Holly. And when they met, Jack promised Finlay that if he scored, Finlay could choose how he celebrated. So he chose this. Well, today the 12-year-old told BBC Breakfast how he was jumping for joy when Grealish scored.
I was jumping around. I was trying to jump.
And then he did the celebration that you'd asked for. When you saw him do it, the fact that he'd remembered and he'd done what you are, that must have been, what do you think?
At first, I thought that he wouldn't remember. But then when he did it, I was just like, oh my God, he's done the work! He's done the work! I love it.
One very happy young man. Now, time somewhat earlier than usual for a look at the weather. Here's Susan Powell.
Thank you, Sophie. We have had a quieter day today, and we started the week off with this area of low pressure filling, but looking out to the Atlantic, another whopper on the way in for Wednesday. As it turns quieter across the UK, though, through this evening and overnight, it will also turn quite chilly. We've already seen a little bit of frost in the Scottish Glens. Frost more widespread across Scotland and northern England by the end of the night. Some mist and fog possible here too, but you saw that band of rain quickly whizzing its way in by the end of the night to the likes of Wales. After temperatures take an early dip here, they'll be back up for first thing tomorrow. And then this weather front will work its way quite quickly right the way across the UK through tomorrow morning. Some pretty heavy rain as it passes through, and then the sun will come out, but don't be fooled by that. It will stay very blustery, and those winds are going to carry in some particularly potent showers. Could be some heavy thundery rain in some areas. I think we'll see the most frequent ones in the west, but the wind will carry them a good way east. Temperatures perhaps a shade up on today. And then for Thursday, we do it all again. Another low brewing in the Atlantic, and in it winds its glorious way through Thursday to the tune of, in the next 48 hours for some parts of the UK, potentially up to 50 millimetres, close to 2 inches of rain. So more wet and windy weather on the way for just about all of us.
Susan, thank you. And that is it from us for tonight. A shorter than usual 6 this evening because of the football. Hugh will be here at 10 though with all the day's news. Now on BBC One, it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Goodbye.